Welcome back to our channel. Today we shall be looking at emolument. Shall be talking about what increment is in civil service. Shall be looking at petitions and appeal in civil service. Okay, now let's get to the business of the day. In civil service, when an officer is newly employed, there is often an appointment letter that is given to the officer. And that appointment letter contains some packages as to how the officer will be paid. His allowances, his monthly salary, and every other thing is spelled out in the appointment letter. The summation of the total breakdown, including the salary and every other allowance in civil service, is known as emolument. Now, by simple definition, emolument simply means the total remuneration package, as conveyed or that is contained in the letter of appointment of the officer. When we say the total remuneration package, we do not only talk about salary. We mean both salary and every other allowances, any form of allowance, any form of it. The total, the complete stuff, it is known as emolument of. It is known as emolument in civil service. Now, it is highly prohibited that when an officer is being employed or when an individual is being employed to the service, he or she does not get paid at any point in time. It is highly prohibited in a civil service. So once an officer is employed, he or she, through the appointment letter granted, gets, with the breakdown as the month goes by, get his or her emolument. Now, once an officer is employed, it is expected that within 2 months of assumption of duty, he or she is placed on the IPPIS platform. It's a platform through which civil servants in the Federal Civil Service of Nigeria that have been paid their monthly salary. It's a platform by the government through which officers have been paid their monthly. It is expected that once an officer resumes or assumes his or her duty within 2 months of the assumption of office, he or she should be placed in the IPPIS. There is a high possibility that after the 2 months, he or she may not be paid, because the essence of the IPPIS, which was introduced by previous administration, was to help check the level of corruption within the service. Now, the IPPIS platform is a platform for which civil servants receive their monthly emolument. In civil service, there is, as we talked about in our last class, we are talking about one of the ways through which civil servants could be punished. One of the ways through which civil servants could be disciplined. And one of the disciplinary measures we talked about was withholding or deferment. One of them was withholding, and the other one was deferment. There are others that we talked about, something like dismissal and whatnot. We talked about them in our last class. Now, before withholding and deferment, I want us to look at something very crucial, which is called increments in civil service, Now, if you, as a civil servant, you discover that at the beginning of every year, there is this percentage of money or emolument, as the case may be, that is added to your previous emolument. A kind of a fraction or a little percentage is always added. That is what they call increment. An increment, the definition simply means because it is calculated based on your grade level, your step. It is calculated. And now an increment itself is a predetermined amount of money. When we say predetermined, it means something that has been calculated before now. A predetermined amount of money that is added to the emolument of a civil servant or an officer at the beginning of each year. Normally, it starts at 1st of January, that is the next year. If, for instance, what we're trying to say is a civil servant who was earning 120 naira last year, which was 2023, and by this year discovered that the salary or the emolument has increased from 120 to 130, well, as 120 to 124. The 4,000 naira, which is the difference between the previous and the present, is known as increment, and it is enjoyed by all civil servants, provided that such civil servant does not have any disciplinary measure, or, for instance, a newly recruited officer. Let me clear this very well now. A newly recruited officer who has not spent up to 6 months the previous year cannot enjoy increment. Yes, let me clear it again. Now, let's say as an officer you were employed into the service, you assume duty into the service around October. You assume duty October 2023, and your total emolument was about 87,000 naira and some fraction. Now, if you work from October, November, December, is about 3 months before the next year, January. So, what it means is that by next year, January, you are not by law qualified to partake or to enjoy the increment, because you've not spent a minimum of 6 months on the service. So, for you to have enjoyed the increment, it means you must have been in the service at most June. July, August, September, October, November, December. It would have been 6 months, which qualifies you to enjoy incremental benefit the next day. So that is what the law says. Now we'll talk about deferment and then withholding. Deferment and withholding. Now, in civil service, as we talked about before, we said deferment or withholding is one of the disciplinary measures given to any civil servant who is culpable. Now, the question is now, what then is withholding? Then what then is deferment? When we talk about withholding, okay, let's talk about deferment first. Deferment simply means an officer is supposed to enjoy an incremental benefit from January. Let's say, okay, as you can see on the board here, we're talking about increments and deferment. We talked about increment, a predetermined amount, calculated amount that is added to an officer's salary. If you watch on the left hand side on the board, you have an officer who was enjoying 87,283 naira 40 kobo as at 2013. And now, as at January 2027, there was an increment. The salary or the emolument has increased to 89,943 naira 60 kobo. Now, the increment, the additional money there is 2,660 naira 20 kobo. Now, this increment, there are certain conditions for an officer to benefit from that increment. Now, for the sake of reiteration, a newly employed officer who came into the service by October 2023, by January 2024, because he or she has not spent up to 6 months, is not supposed to enjoy that increment. And remember, increment starts every 1st of January. That is when it starts. It means that officer has to wait till 2025 before he or she can enjoy increment. Again, this increment could be withheld, or this increment could be deferred. What we mean by deferred is what we said before. We said deferment is a disciplinary measure that is given to an erring officer or an officer that is found culpable of an offense or a misconduct. And that means that at the beginning of the next year, which is January 2024, an officer who was on 87,283 40 kobo on 2023 will not in any case enjoy this increment, which is 2,616 and 20 kobo, because he or she is on punishment. The increment will be deferred, will be later pushed forward, either deferred to about 3 months time or 6 months time. What it means is that by April of 2024, the officer will now start enjoying the 89,943 naira 60 kobo. Or by July of 2024, he or she will now start enjoying 89,943 naira 60 kobo. Remember, the backlog, which is the first January, February, March, will not be paid back to the officer. As in, cumulative will not be, is a form of a punishment or a disciplinary measure taken against an officer. So there is nothing like paying the backlog that he or she has been cleared of the offense or whatever. He or she will not be paid back to, the money will not be paid back to the officer. And again, once deferment has occurred, it is onus now on the chief accounting officer of that line MDA to inform the officer, the affected officer, that his salary or his increment will be deferred, either for 3 months or 6 months, as the case may be. And after that, the PS or the Director General will also inform the Accountant General of the Federation, the Auditor General for the Federation, and the Office of the Head of the Civil Service of the Federation. If you remember in our last class, or as we shall say in our subsequent class, when we were talking about to whom certain responsibilities are due to, when we're talking about condition of service salaries, we said it is the responsibility of head of civil service of the federation. So the office is also notified, as you can see on the board here. Now, when after the 3 months or the 6 months, the officer will now be restored back to his original increment, which is 89,943 naira 60 kobo. The officer again will be notified that restoration has taken place at any point in time, be it April or May. Now, the slide on the board simply explains what we have on the board simply explains deferment in a civil service. As we said before, we said it's a disciplinary measures for is a disciplinary measure for a culpable and erring officer. Now, let's look at what withholding mean. What is the meaning of withholding? Then we cannot compare what deferment and withholding means. What both of them mean. Again, withholding is another disciplinary measure that is given to an erring officer. Now, you can looking at the board for withholding. Okay, an officer that was originally on 87,293 naira 40 kobo for throughout the year of 2023, that is the emolument, is supposed to enjoy an incremental benefit of 2,660 naira the next year, starting from 1st of January 2024. In the case of withholding, this increment will not be paid to the officer. Throughout 2024, from January to December 2024, there will be this increment of 2,600 naira will not be added to the officer's money. The increment will now begin 2025, which is 1st of January 2025. As you can see on the board, withholding itself is about 12 months. It's about 12 months. That is when the officer will now start enjoying what he or she was supposed to have enjoyed 2024. You cannot discover that withholding itself is more grievous or is a more serious penalty than deferment. In the case of deferment, what you lose is about a maximum of 6 months. You just lose a maximum of 6 months. But in the case of withholding, you lose all about 12 months. What you're supposed to get for about 12 months, monetary benefit you're supposed to get for about 12 months is all gone. Now, again, for withholding, the officer must be notified. Office of the Accountant General of the Federation must also be notified. Office for the Auditor General for the Federation must also be notified. Then Office of the Head of Civil Service of the Federation must also be notified. So this is, or rather what we've just talked about now, there are measures, punitive measures through which erring officers could be punished. As a follow-up to this, or better still, a kind of a engagement to our listeners. I would like to ask, based on what we've talked about, we would like to ask few questions to know if they are actually following. Perhaps this question will definitely they will come up on your screen. They will come up on your screen. We said one, a predetermined amount of money added to an officer's emolument at the beginning of each year is known as A. Salary, B. Increment, C. Wages, D. Stipend. We talked about it before. We said what it is. Then two, we said the total remuneration package as contained in the appointment letter of an officer is called, we said A is wages. The option says A wages, B salary, C emolument, D pay. Then number three from the board, the question says withholding is a more serious penalty than deferment. A false, B indifferent, C true, D not sure. We've talked about it. So as a civil servant who wants to grow in the service career progression wise, in the course of your growth, you're expected to embark on competitive exams and whatnot. So definitely the questions that are coming up on your board, they should guide you in answering some of these questions. There should be a kind of a guide in answering some of these questions.